Paducah Junior College began in 1932 as a private institution, and it's rather remarkable that a small community like Paducah could take upon itself at a time of great national crisis to found an educational institution. At a time when 15 million workers were unemployed, 1 out of every 4 seeking employment was on some form of a breadline, the people in Paducah took upon themselves to found an educational institution to meet the needs of their students. This institution lasted until 1968, when by contract it merged into the University of Kentucky's community college system and became Paducah Community College. With me is Dr. Robert Gordon Matheson, the President Emeritus of Paducah Junior College, and known to everyone as the Dean. Perhaps, Dr. Matheson, we should emphasize the significance of this title, since with Paducah Junior College it had a little different connotation than that found in other institutions of higher education.
Well, of course, the college arose out of a terrific necessity. The Metropolitan Life Insurance Company had determined that the percentage of graduates from Tillman High School going into college was the lowest of that from any town of 30,000 in the United States.
The lowest in the United States?
In the United States. And Shoes Riggs was the district representative of Metropolitan. And he came into the picture very early because he was cognizant of this study. Well, there's a long story to the way in which it evolved. Really, a few people just really knew that they had to do something to get college for people who couldn't get out of town. And they went through various orderly steps. 4 of them met at the Boswell's restaurant, which was the meeting place in those days, and found out that they were embarked on a rather ambitious program and they'd need more help.
This was Tom Waller, I believe, the local attorney,
yes.
And you are
Bell,
who was a pastor of a local church,
yeah.
And Will Ezell, who was electrical engineer, and the 4th one was Robert Overstreet, who I believe later became city manager, among other things.
A long story. He was a manager of Columbia amusement theaters for years and years and years. This group met and they saw they needed help, and so they decided to meet that night in Mr. Waller's home, and each one bring somebody else. Mm-hmm. And everybody brought somebody but Mr. Waller. And they had 7 at that meeting. And they then expanded the personnel that they would need to do anything, and met in the ballroom of the Cobb, and it 50 people.
50 people.
And only 2 people in the crowd were against it. 48 of them thought that it was a good idea. Some of them had questions about whether they could do it or not.
Yes.
But everybody wanted it. And this group elected nominating committee for a board of trustees and went through a good deal of paraphernalia that was rather well thought out.
Well, the nominating committee was Horace Owen, I believe, who was
Owen
a businessman, and Brady Stewart, who was the county judge, I believe, at the time, and W.C. Johnston, who was the local agricultural agent.
Yes.
And they served as a nominating committee.
Yeah.
And then they brought back a report to the group, which was adopted,
Yeah.
and came up with the first board of trustees. And on the board we had Dr. J.N. Bailey.
Yes.
What was he? A
general practitioner.
General practitioner. And again, Urban Radcliffe Bell, who was sort of a moving spirit behind the institution. Mr. Jett, who was, he was also with insurance, I believe.
Yes.
And B.G. Krieger, was it?
Kruger.
Kruger from International Shoe Company.
Yes.
And a Mr. Meyer, who was with one of the banks in town.
Citizens Bank.
Citizens, and Schultz Riggs, who you mentioned was an insurance agent. Tom Waller again, the local attorney. And W.C. Shields and Mr. Johnstone again from the nominating committee was appointed to the trustees. And finally, a man whom you worked with when you became the chief administrative officer, Gabriel Rosenthal.
Yes.
And I believe the first president of this was Mr. Bell.
Yes.
And then after he resigned, for a period of time there, the dean acted as the chief administrative officer, and he and Mr. Rosenthal worked together essentially as the decision maker, executive. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe it is, but I think maybe that Stanley Reeves, who took on those administrative offices, might have had a little more dignified title.
He was the acting president.
Acting president, I believe, until they decided, well, they'd already decided that they were top-heavy with administrative officers. And he saw it real soon, and he dropped out, and Dr. A.L. Pickens acted as the chief executive officer, Dean Pickens. And then Norman Braden he was acting when I came.
So we had essentially then, we started out with the president, and then for a long period of time there was no real head of the institution.
That's right.
Other than the acting dean. And this is why the title dean becomes so important. And I believe you came in 36.
Yes.
And acted as the dean and chief administrative officer until 1947,
Yes.
when you became the president of Paducah Junior College,
Yes.
the final president of the institution. Well, this original group had to do something, and they felt that they needed some help. I believe they brought in some nationally known consultants in the junior college field. Dr. Coos of the University of Chicago, and a former teacher of yours, I believe, from Peabody.
Yes, Dr. Doak Camel was teaching the junior college at Peabody College. When I went back in 31, I couldn't get a job in the summertime in 31, so I thought that my time was worth more than 60 cents a day. That's where I'd clear picking peaches. By the time I got there and ate my lunch, well, I'd make about 60 cents a day, and I decided my time was worth more than that, so I went back to Peabody. I'd already had my master's degree, but I went back there for additional graduate work, especially in college administration. And Doe Campbell at that time was the secretary of the American Association of Junior Colleges. And he was on the inside of the whole movement, on the inside of, and I might say that on my way to talk to the Board of Trustees up here, I stopped by Nashville and talked to him.
To see if you wanted to take this.
And he told me if I was willing to do it. I told him I was willing to go to Paducah and ring doorbells for 2 years. And if that didn't work, then to quit.
Right. I believe the original suggestion was rather ambitious considering the financial status of the time. The University of Kentucky was trying to pay their faculty with script. The local Board of Education couldn't meet their payroll. And yet they started this institution of higher education, and I believe the two consultants recommended that they try to fund it essentially from tuition fees.
Yes.
What was the original tuition? Do you remember?
Tuition was $100 a semester.
$100 a semester.
And 47 was the tuition at University of Kentucky, and 28, I think, was at Murray State.
And Murray was a relatively new institution itself. It had only been in existence some 7 years.
Yeah.
Well, so the projections were that it would need 100 students with a $100 per semester, and if they were part-time, it would be $7.50 an hour. And they started out in the old YMCA building, and the first body of the college was less than anticipated. I believe the first student was Evelyn Bell, the daughter of Mr. Bell, the president. And they had 8 sophomores and 60 freshmen, which
Yeah.
is what, 32 short of their projections.
Yes.
This must have thrown off their budget from then on.
Yes, the budget, actually, they collected about 13,000,
About 13,000.
and they needed 18.
So they were continually running a deficit.
Yeah.
Well, they graduated a class, though, did they not, in 1933?
Yes, they graduated the class of 8, and Murray Rogers, a celebrated Paducan, was the first person that got a diploma.
Murray Rogers.
He had been to Hope College for a year, transferred back to PJC. A number of interesting Paducans in that first 8 students.
Well, in addition to the students, they had a rather impressive faculty for a first faculty. I believe they had a total of 8 on the faculty, and out of that 3 had their PhDs.
Yes. And one had everything but the dissertation.
And everything but the dissertation. That would be Mr. Bell, the president. And then in addition, the PhDs were, you mentioned Dr. Stanley Reeves. He was the academic dean.
Yeah.
And he had his PhD from the University of Florida. Dr. Henry Pepper.
Yes.
What was his field? Political science,
Political
I believe
science,
it was.
yes.
And then Dr. Emily Calcutt, who served as Dean of Women. Most of them had a dual responsibility.
Yeah.
She also taught English, I believe it was.
Yeah.
And then Norman Braden, he was a science instructor, and served as registrar. And then there was Vera Moore, or
Yes, Vera Moore, and she became registrar.
and she served also as an instructor in foreign language.
Matter of fact, I came here because Dr. Braden had left. I never did work with him.
You didn't work with.
Yeah.
And then we had a music instructor, Philip Eugene LaRoe,
Yes.
who was, I believe, played the piano and organ primarily.
Yeah.
And they started out with a coach who did not have his master's but was working toward it.
Yeah.
That was Curtis Sanders.
Yeah.
I believe he was local, wasn't he?
Yes. LaRoe and Sanders both were local.
So a very impressive faculty. But the student body kept declining and put more pressure on budgetary considerations. So by the 1935-36 academic year, the year before that you came, I believe, they were down to 31.
Yes.
Well, what do they see as necessary to give them a firm base for finances?
Well, they knew that they couldn't pass the hat in Paducah at that time. And so they had to get a steady flow of cash. And the idea developed that we should make it a municipal institution and fund it largely with taxes.
Well, I believe this was introduced into the state legislature by the Paducah representative, Henry Ward.
Yes.
And the Enabling Act was passed. That's KRS 165.
1-6.
Right.
Yeah.
And along with that, permission for second-class cities to supply a tax revenue to municipal colleges. That was 165.17. I believe you said that they tapped in on an existing legislative enactment to do this, something that dealt with...
One that enabled Louisville to establish a municipal institution,
the University of Louisville.
University of Louisville, and to tax the people of Louisville for that amount.
Well, the tax was based upon a range per $1,000 of evaluation. Is that correct? Between
5 and
5
7
and
mil.
7.
A minimum of 5 and a maximum of 7. And the times being what they were, and public relations being important, why the Board of Trustees asked for 5 5 meals it was, not 5 cents, 5 meals.
Well, after this was passed by the state legislature, how did the community respond to it? Was it accepted without any opposition here?
No, there were a number of people who were statesman-like really in their opposition. They just didn't think that the times were right for a municipality to undertake the operation of a college.
Well, the times were very hard.
Very
There were
hard.
12,000 people on the delinquent tax roll in Paducah.
Yes.
So
And then there were some others who motives might have been, at least their excitement about it might have been augmented by the fact that they were large property.
well, it would bear heavily upon them.
Would cost them money. And some of them told their tenants that they'd raise their rents
So we
an
had
enormous amount. And so
we
forth
had
and so on.
opposition then
Yes.
growing in the community, and I believe within the city government, only one person really opposed the idea.
Yeah.
The mayor at the time was
Washburn.
Dr. Washburn, and
No, not Dr. Washburn. He was not a doctor.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Mayor Washburn was essentially in favor of it.
Yes.
And most of the other commissioners were in favor of it. But, Dr.
Pulliam.
Pulliam, that's the physician who
Pulliam.
was in opposition to it.
Yeah.
And Herbert Melton introduced the thing into the city government, and it was approved by Tuttle Lockwood and by George Hannon, and the one in opposition continued to oppose. And then I believe he started the movement to put it on the ballot. Is that correct?
No. I'm sure that the beginning of starting the petitions for a ballot, I'm sure he was in on it, but he was not the only one. The large landholders,
Oh, it was the
Yeah.
property owners
Dr.
that really
Jones
initiated.
and Columbia Amusement, and some of the others that had a whole lot of property and just thought that was a burden that ought not to be put on them. There's some little suggestion that it might have been selfish because the people that objected to it would not have sent their children to a local college.
They would have, the wealth would
They
have
would
to send them someplace else.
Send them somewhere else under any circumstances.
Well, then I believe they got a petition that had almost 3,000
Yes.
of the 10,000 registered voters.
Yeah.
So that meant it had to go to the polls in November.
Yeah.
And in November of 1936, a vote was taken on this critical issue in the life of the college. Was there any support for the college from the laboring class, for example?
Yes, the IWW, the International Workers of the World.
The Wobblies, known for their violence. And,
They were very much in favor of whatever was good for the downtrodden and the unemployed and so forth. And it just was a matter of policy with them, and a great many of them were real hard workers and really were sincere in what they were doing. And then there was an unexpected support that came from the black community,
the black community.
who could not come to the college because of the day law.
At the time, KRS 158.020, the day law, specifically prohibited educating mixed races in the same classroom unless you were dealing with orphans or criminals.
Yeah.
So even though they could not, under the law, attend Paducah Junior College at the time, they did support it. Well, that is unusual.
Yes, it was. I think that part of it was anything that's good for the disadvantaged is good for us.
Yes.
But I also think that probably the most support was a rally around Dr. Anderson, who
Founder of
was West Kentucky.
West Kentucky Industrial College, which was the first institution of higher education, actually in the Purchase District. And it was really created to train black teachers.
Yes.
So Dr. Anderson then came to the support of a sister institution, Paducah Junior College.
Yeah.
Well, was it primarily because of one educator supporting another, or were some other
Well,
motives
it was
there?
partly statesmanship, and then it was partly a very, very close relationship with Tom Waller, one of the principal founders of the college. Dr. Anderson had been indicted by the finance department. They had accused him of misappropriating funds. And he secured Mr. Waller as his attorney. And to make a long story short, when the time came to present the case to the jury, during the course of the presentation of the evidence, it became rather evident that the money had not been spent as he had been directed to spend it.
So there was some,
Yes. They was directed to add books to the library because the crediting association said he needed more books. And they gave him money to buy books with, and he built a roof over the library.
So
And his logic was that it's a whole lot better to have the books that you have protected than to buy books and have them ruined by leaking roof. But Mr. Waller made a very classic presentation to the jury. He said, "Now, gentlemen, have any of you," and by the way, it was gentlemen, there were no ladies on it. A gentleman said, "Have you ever scrambled any eggs?" Said, "Yeah." Said, "Have you ever unscrambled an egg?" No, nobody had ever done that. He said, "Well, now I want to explain this to you." I said, "There's no doubt that Mr. Anderson has scrambled the eggs that were sent down here from Frankfurt to him. But every one of them's there." And he closed the case. And Mr. Anderson was declared not guilty. And he never forgot that.
well, this is also the problems of a struggling institution.
Yeah.
You know, you have priorities that sometimes seems out of place. But I'm sure at Paducah Junior College there were similar problems that had to be met, such as even a broken furnace grate would cause major problems to an institution on the border of survival. Well, Dr. Anderson then brought support to the municipal taxation, and with the support of labor and the black community, then it passed. And I believe...
And we had rather good support, too, in Avondale, Paxton Park. And even though the people there would not send there, probably not send there, though it turned out that a great many of them did later on, not immediately, but later on.
Well, there's some confusion, or perhaps a legend that has grown up about the strategy on how to get the bill passed, that the wording was deliberately confusing so that the voters perhaps were misled. But would you comment on that?
I would say that was very much exaggerated and not true. An ordinance had been passed to establish the junior college. It became necessary to put on the ballot an ordinance to repeal the ordinance that was on there. And if you voted to repeal the ordinance, you voted yes. Which would mean that the college would be discontinued.
Right.
If you voted not to repeal, you voted to keep the college.
So a
no vote meant that you were voting not to repeal the ordinance establishing the college, and was a vote for the college.
I think this is one of your first jobs when you came, wasn't it? That you had to see this through. Well, did you have any trouble explaining this to the faculty and the students?
Yes, and when we tried to explain it to the faculty and students and saw how confused they were, we knew that we had to do a selling job to the voters.
So you really then just divided the city up into precincts And I believe the students and the faculty and others fanned out throughout the community on an educational task to let the voters know the nature of the bill. Well, were you impartial in informing every community, perhaps?
We, I'm quite sure, were pragmatic in what we did. When we ran into a group that we thought, and into a section of the town that we thought would support us, we were very careful to make the whole thing plain. We did not have enough people to explain it to everybody. And so I'm quite sure that we were not quite as interested in explaining it to people that just might vote no.
Well, surely.
Yes, you know, as we were to those that we were afraid wouldn't. Yeah.
And the campaign was successful.
Yes.
I believe there were 4,223 that voted no, which in essence meant to keep the college, and 3,957, which means a difference of 422 votes.
Correct.
Which is rather close, considering the times.
Yeah.
So here then we have this, this institution making the first of its major changes. It's changing from a private institution into a municipal college with, for the first time, a local tax base. Well, with this then, they were able to start the next year with perhaps a little brighter outlook than previously.
Yeah.
What was the tuition?
Tuition was $37.50 semester.
Which was a considerable drop from the $100.
That was less than the University of Kentucky. Had one $5 registration fee. If you came back in January, you didn't have to register again.
Oh.
Because in other words, it cost you $80 a year. $75 for tuition and $5 for registration. Quite a bit more attractive, and I did what I said I would do. I rang doorbells. I can still remember the reception that I got in a few places where I rang doorbells.
Well, other than friendly?
Other than friendly. I can also remember people who absolutely knew that their daughter was going to Vanderbilt, you know, that were just as nice to me as if I'd been governor of the state of Kentucky. I remember them. And some of them, by the way, one of them I remember especially, were very, very nice to me. Their daughter went to a prestigious college and stayed 11 days and came back and went to Paducah Junior College. And so she came into the junior college with considerable approval from the dean.
Well, also the college then had its life assured, at least by the tax. But then immediately we face a major crisis, the flood of 1937, which will be the topic of our next session. Thank you, sir.
Good.